Good evening. Hello. Good evening to all our master's and doctoral students. And of course, in recent times, we've been joined by our honor students who are all ready and in waiting to become master's and doctoral candidates themselves. Welcome to this, the second part of the lectures on the role of theoretical and conceptual frameworks in scholarly research. You will remember, maybe before I go into a recap of what part one was about, let me just do some very basic administrative things. My name is Professor Tennyson Mokuchini. I am the project leader for UNISA's online postgraduate research support program that you are part of. And of course, we have, as part of the program, we do quite substantial work around teaching you in different methodologies and all the aspects that relate to the development of your proposal. And for those of you who are writing out your dissertations and your theses, we also cover that. Just as a point of note, you will remember that the way the session runs is that you see me for a short while. I'll turn the video off. Then I will do a very quick recap of what part one was about, and then thereafter engage much more thoroughly in part two of this session around theory and theoretical and conceptual frameworks. Of course, the way you see the presentation now means that you cannot download the soft copy, but we are circulating that to all the students, and we of course will avail the video recordings that go with this. Just as a point of note, I have, as always, I include some additional slides that will be useful for you, particularly if you're looking at them in the absence of the audio part of this. So you may discover that there are things I speak about, and then when we get to the slides, I've already kind of discussed them. I've included the slides just to make sure that you have a much more complete written version of what it is that I speak to you about. Our next sessions are in the week of the 20th. I think the next session is on the 23rd of July, where in that session, and this is a revision of what we had initially intended to do, but that week the sessions will walk you through. Firstly, the first session will walk you through what a typical proposal should have, and we will speak through some of the challenging areas around proposals. So if you can start to keep of the things that you are unclear about in relation to your proposal, then the second session will speak more about the development of chapters, chapter 1, all the way up to chapter 5 if it's a master's, and then 5 and more if it's a doctorate. So those are the things that we will do, but you will of course get the normal communication around this. But all I'm just asking you to do is to think concretely about the things that you need to get clarification about around your proposal. Of course, whenever I invite this, people will decide to ask those questions today, and you may find it's not particularly helpful if you have the intense questions before you know what the actual formal session will show you. So I ask you to just keep note of the things you want to ask around proposals, if it's deeply involved with the proposal development process, and keep that for the next set of sessions. So basically, we will not be having sessions next week. It is the week after that we'll have these guided tours through proposals, guided tours through dissertations and theses. Right now, I'm going to turn off my video to allow to get better bandwidth, and then I'll proceed by through what we had a look at during last week's presentation, or the earlier presentation, part 1, the one that we did 2 days ago, I think on the 6th, and then I will quickly connect onto what we have for today. Now, just if you remember, the initial session that you had looked really at theory, the integration of theory into your scholarly work, be it a proposal, be it a dissertation, be it a thesis. And in basic terms, we spoke about the 3 ways in which theory is integrated into research. The first was the way that theory is integrated as a paradigm. And in that respect, we spoke about things such as ontology, epistemology, and how theory informs your methodology and your data collection methods and so forth. The second aspect that we looked at was the introduction of theory as a lens. And it was this aspect that relates to how theory can be used as a way of informing the way that you look at the phenomena that you're interested in. So when I say lens, I'm talking about optical lens, that we utilize theory to inform the way that we see the subjects, the things that we're studying. And in that respect, I spoke then about different ways of seeing. I talked about objectivism, I spoke about subjectivism, I spoke about constructivism. I mentioned also other ways of seeing, such as interpretivism. And during the questioning, I spoke also about pragmatism, the way of seeing things if you believe that the phenomena you're interested in could benefit from both a qualitative and a quantitative exploration in a single study. So that was the second way in which we thought about theory. Then the third way was when you think about theory in the form of it being new knowledge. And that is the expression of theory in terms of it becoming the new theoretical positions that you hold after you have collected the data and you've done your study. So there's that basic 3-way understanding of what theory can be seen as. You can see it as the pre-existing paradigm choices that inform how you will view and see the thing you're interested in. You can see it as the lens that allows you to navigate the phenomena that you're interested in using particular types of lens. Then, of course, you see theory as the output that allows you to think in very specific theoretical ways about what it is you're looking at. So that was, in short, what the initial, the first part looked at. Now we proceed to theoretical concepts that are often spoken about within master's and doctoral work. And these theoretical concepts need to be explained much more explicitly so people understand them. And in basic terms, I want to look at theoretical frameworks. I want to look at conceptual frameworks. And essentially in this section, we will differentiate what a theoretical framework is by comparison to a conceptual framework. I'll also speak to you about how people determine the things that they include in their theoretical framework and how those things that they've included inform them in terms of how they develop a conceptual framework. So basically, one of the very common questions people will ask is, they will say, look, my topic is about this and that. And remember, I will continue this theme of looking at something that I think all of you can relate to. So I know you are all on a course of study, you are students, and by virtue of being students, you are concerned about success. And similarly, researchers are concerned about your success, and they may want to know what personality traits are associated with success, with student success in postgraduate studies. So essentially, that focus area will be interested in concepts related to personality, concepts related to success, and then concepts related to postgraduate activity. So that study that I've given you as an example has 3 potential theoretical spaces that it looks at. So similarly, by that assessment, one would expect that when you're doing the theories you look at, they will come from the world of personality studies, they'll come from the world of success behavior studies, they'll come from the world of what postgraduateness looks like. So that's a very rudimentary way of explaining and showing to you how you determine the boundaries of what you consider to be interesting theories that you will include in your study. So if you have a study now, you should look at the title of it, look at the aim, and ask yourself, what are the concepts or fields of study that are included in my work? And on that basis, you get a sense now of how you frame the theoretical insights that you will develop and explore in relation to your study. So that is the first question, and this question was asked of me at the last session. So I'm providing an answer to it, but as we go through this session, it will become much more explicit. Right, so the first thing is people always need to have an understanding of the concepts that are central to what it is that we're talking about. And in this session today, we're talking about theoretical frameworks, we're talking about conceptual frameworks. So the very, very center of allowing you to proceed in understanding these two notions within research comes from us initially defining them individually and relative to each other. So individually speaking, a theoretical framework in a study is really the collection of relevant theories that relate to what this study is looking at. So when I was talking to you about a study that's looking at the personality traits that are related to student success within postgraduate study, a theoretical framework of that would be looking at existing theories that are related to personality traits, related to success, and related to graduateness. So theoretical frameworks really utilize existing theories that have some relationship or bear a reference to the thing that you're studying. Of course, by virtue of the fact that they're existing theories, they are not always a perfect fit for what it is you're studying, but they are close enough to be relevant. And that is the position that one must accept and adopt when they think of a theoretical framework. So a theoretical framework is not exact, it's theories that have been developed, but they will not exactly fit the thing you're looking at. And often you have mixed 3 or 4 conceptual spaces that dilute the relevance of each of the theories that you choose. But nonetheless, they are relatable theories that one would quote. So if, say, for example, in this example of mine to do with student success. One of the characteristics or the theories that's relevant to success, student success, might be a theory of motivation, because it talks about what it is that people need to have in place for them to be motivated to work hard, and so forth and so forth. Now, by contrast, so think about this. You have something you're studying, and you know that this something touches 3 or 4 conceptual spaces. It touches student success, it touches behavioral sciences, it touches graduateness, scholarly achievement. If you find existing theories written by others from the past, if you find those theories and you think these make sense, then those, when combined together, represent what we would call your theoretical framework. In a world that's full of resource, you might look at the fields that you're interested in and find that there are 50 theories that relate. But of course, in your world, within your study, in master's and doctoral work, you cannot cite all those theories. So you identify the theories that you think are most relevant and most relate to what it is that you're looking at. So your theoretical framework, generally in a master's level study, the theoretical framework might be 2 or 3 theories. And this is entirely, all these numbers I'm giving you, like the 2 or 3 theories, it's just an informed guesstimate, it's an informed estimation from what I've seen over the 21 years that I've been teaching this area, but it is not a rule. The ultimate rule defining fact is if the title of your study and the aim of your study has many concepts buried in it, then one would expect to see a theoretical framework that has many theories. But by the law of average, master's level theoretical frameworks will have a couple, two theories, because usually you are trying to understand relationships between A and B. So A will have its own theory that you use, B will have its own theory. So your theoretical framework will have 2. If you're doing a doctorate and then you're studying much more complex relationships that have many more concepts buried in them, then your theoretical framework will have many more associated theories. So you may find that in a doctorate, someone has a theoretical framework that's comprised of 5 models or theories that they thought were helpful in explaining the concepts that they're interested in. Now, so that is the theoretical framework, and the speak around that, it's all identified. By contrast, the conceptual framework is something that you develop yourself rather than something that is developed from existing theory. And how that works is, if, say, I am doing a study that includes a study of personality, a study of theories to do with student success, and then of course things to do with graduateness, I might find 6 different models or theories that I think are useful for this. But each of these theories might have 5 concepts or 5 components. Some might have 2 components, some might have 10 components, and of those components, you are only maybe interested in 2 components from theory 1, 2 out of 5, maybe 1 out of 7 from theory 2, maybe 6 out of 20 components from theory 3. So those little components that you are interested in, you would extract them from your theories and then join them together into a new self-devised framework. And that self-devised framework, which is a collation of the concepts that you think that matter from the theoretical frameworks, that thing is what we call the conceptual framework. So essentially, when you have a theoretical framework and you've got all these theories that are relevant, there are things about the theories that you perceive to be particularly relevant. You'll select those and join them up into this new framework, which is a framework where you've put together the concepts of interest from the different theories. That framework we call the conceptual framework. So you develop it yourself. It is in most cases not published. In every case, it is not published at the point you're developing it because it is your idea. But what might happen is if you are someone who's very successful and your study or your research gets noted and is published, and then the conceptual framework that you had becomes respected as a new theory, the next person who studies your field and borrows that theory from you, to them, your conceptual framework is now a theoretical, it's part of a theoretical framework. So you recognize then that the conceptual framework has the potential of later becoming something more respected if it's published, it's peer reviewed, and so forth. So in essence, this world of the theoretical framework and the conceptual frameworks, they all explain the path that you as a researcher follow from the ground up when it comes to how you are dealing with theory. So the theoretical framework is what, when it's part of the lens development part, where you have a lens and you're thinking, I want to understand these 3 areas of interest, and these are the 3 theories I will use to inform how I see things. You pick those 3 theories, you write about them, you assess them, you decide that you don't want everything from each of them, you want components from each, and then those components, you join them up and you create a conceptual framework. That conceptual framework is literally it's a kind of dictionary now of the concepts that you are interested in your study. Not the ones that others wrote about, but the concepts you're interested in your study. And if you give this much thought, if your conceptual framework is the concepts you're interested in, it then makes sense that when you develop a data collection instrument, that instrument gets its shape and the components that it will investigate come from the conceptual framework. So your conceptual framework becomes the thing that directs your data collection tool. And that's where so when people say, how am I going to do? What are the things I will include in my questionnaire? What are the things I will include in my interview? What are the things that I will include in my survey? The answer is really things. It's the things that your conceptual framework has identified. Of course, in addition to those things that your conceptual framework has identified, every data collection instrument will have a little preamble section that just collects some basic characteristics about the sample. So people's age, where they work, whatever the demographic things of interest are. So when you develop this questionnaire, you'll find that the first part of your data collection instrument is generally always about important sample characteristics. Then the second part will then go through each of the concepts that are detailed in your conceptual framework. Now, this slide here revisits what I've already explained to you in much more everyday language about what a theoretical framework is, that it is the blueprint or guide for your research. It is that guide that tells you these are the theories that matter. These are the things that help me to see how I see it's the foundation upon which your research is constructed. And of course, once you are clear about the concepts that are embedded in a theoretical framework, it gives you then a map of the things you should pursue, but you take those things and you join them up much more explicitly to create a more specified map, which we have now called the conceptual framework. This slide here covers things that I have already said, but it's usually good to kind of see it expressed in the everyday language that I gave it to you as, and also expressed in the context of some predecessor authors who have written about this. So I hope as you read this, it now makes absolute sense. But I think my explanation about the difference between a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework should really allow you to be able to see the clarity in a very clear way, the differences. Now, of course, remember the theoretical framework, because it pulls in relevant theories, it helps to guide you in defining what it is that your study will really be vaguely exploring. Which fields will your study explore, will relate to? And of course, this idea that it is linked to the phenomena being investigated is the idea that if your title of your phenomena, the aim of your study, mentions 3 concepts, then the theoretical framework will indeed have emerged from those 3 concepts. I provide additional clarification about some of the roles and reasons that theoretical frameworks are important. Right, so one of the things, I mean, I've put this slide up for you to look at, and one of the things I've not spoken about, but need to mention nonetheless, is the nature, the way in which theoretical frameworks actually allow for some systematic way of deciding what it is that you will be interested in your study and what it is you will leave out. So they help to make it clear that your interests are not based on your personal instincts, but are driven by relatable theories that are relevant to what it is that you're looking at. Now, I also have already explained to you how you go about constructing a theoretical framework, but for the purposes of remembering this when I'm not around, you know that the basic idea with theoretical frameworks is that if you have the aim of the study, if you have the title of the study, you can look at those 2, and from them look at the conceptual fields that, or the theoretical fields that are implicated, and then think about how it is that you go into finding relatable theories for each of these. And of course, I give 5 steps in this, and these steps come from Simon and Goes, who suggest some helpful points. And they say that, you know, you base it on the key variables of your research. You also read and review related literature and see what it is that people are leaning on in terms of theoretical foundations of those areas. Then you list the things and variables that are emerging as being important. And then you look at theory that relates to these variables, so you can understand how to link your areas of interest to the emerging theoretical framework. And then, of course, the conceptual framework talks more now about the specific natural progression of your topic. So this now looks at all the previously developed theories, and you pick out the ones that matter. And then from that, you join them up in as logical a way as you can perceive, and you come up with voila, a framework that we'll then call the conceptual framework. Similarly, there's some additional content here that offers additional insights into what a conceptual framework is. None of this material that is presented here is markedly different from what I've already provided in the earlier part of this introductory element, but I've provided it here just so that you have some defined statements that you can refer to in my absence. The additional thing that is of note here is that, generally speaking, because conceptual frameworks are concerned with concepts that have been identified from different theoretical fields, they end up with a list of, as being a list of things. And the best representation of conceptual frameworks tend to be graphical things, you know, diagrammatic things. People will do a tree that has relationships. People will do, they will do a table that has relationships. People will do some type of figure that depicts the constructs that are of interest to this new study that you're carrying out. So generally speaking, when people talk about a conceptual framework, it presents itself in the form of a picture. And that picture will have multiple factors and variables and so forth. Of course, the importance of this is that conceptual frameworks help you to then tie down very explicitly what your interest or what your specific research question is about. It then also offers you that ability to have a concrete map of the things that your data collection process should be interested in. And by that deduction, they also offer you the grounds upon which you develop the concepts of interest for your data collection instrument. The additional bit here that needs to be just stated is that, of course, when you pick out the concepts of interest from your different theories that were in your theoretical framework, the interrelatedness of each is known to you in your head, and the diagram may not clearly specify all of that. So it is always important that to really have a sound conceptual framework, you don't just present a picture and leave it at that. You present a picture, and underneath it you offer an explanatory narrative that gives some explanation of how your picture and the concepts in your picture relate to each other. This slide just briefly captures the differences between theoretical frameworks and conceptual frameworks. These are differences that I have already specified at least 2 or 3 times in the duration of this presentation, but I have them here just so that you're able to refer to them in my absence. So the key bit here, and it's a restating of what I've said, that theoretical frameworks are derived from a joining up of theories, while conceptual framework are derived from concepts that you've extracted from the theories. So, and then of course that then helps you to realize that the building block of theoretical frameworks is theories. The building block of conceptual frameworks are concepts. Now, all of this is all good and makes perfect sense until people are asked to develop frameworks, particularly firstly, to identify the theories that are relevant in developing their theoretical framework, and secondly, to extract those things that matter so that they can be carried forward as concepts that will be central to a conceptual framework. So the next 10 or so slides walk us through, they test drive this thing of framework development. Of course, we're doing this using a topic that I've chosen, but you need to be able to also see what it is that's happening and apply it to your own study context. Okay, so you would have noticed now that my interest is, I tend to have a lot of social sciences problems, human behavior type problems, and I choose this in part because if you're a human, regardless of what you have studied, the topics that are embedded in them should be quite familiar without you having had to have done a degree in a specific field. So this thing that we're looking at now is we're looking at the factors, or basically, as you know, there's quite a substantial number of people in the adult population who have problems with substances, with taking too much alcohol, smoking the wrong things, that sort of thing. And often they seek treatment at some point in their journey, and then some of them relapse. And in that group of people who relapse, there are some who go and seek formal counseling or assistance with their problems. And the interest of this question is really to understand what it is, what are the factors that influence whether people take up or do not take up these services that are intended for their well-being. So the initial hunch is that, look, you read up on why people adopt certain behaviors when it comes to health, and you quickly discover that people's beliefs, pre-existing beliefs about health, are important. So if you're someone who believes that taking drugs is actually not a health concern, it is more of a choice that people might not like, but it should never be treated as a health issue, then your sense about whether we should treat it or not will differ. So this idea that your health belief has a lot to do with the things you decide to attend to or the things you decide to not attend to. Similarly, I mean, you can take the example of the COVID vaccine that we're in the middle of now. There are some people who choose that they do not want to take it, and some who say they do. And you will find that many of their decisions about this are driven by their pre-existing beliefs about things. They might have a lot of conspiracy-based ideas about injections and so forth. And that hunch, that whole field of how people's beliefs are affect the way they relate with health priorities is being discussed by many theorists. But one theory that's very, very well commonly cited is this theory of, as they call it, the HBM in short, which is really the health belief model. And this health belief model argues that there are certain categories of things that assist people to decide about whether or not they want to act on specific health issues. So we know that someone's belief has something to do with it. We also can have a hunch that apart from someone deciding to take up something or not, they may actually be affected by general motivation. So someone might say, hey, they are generally not motivated to think about their drinking behavior because they have other more pressing priorities. So it's not that they don't believe that it's a problem. They do believe it's a problem, but they are challenged by other priorities. So essentially, you find yourself thinking, hey, this question that I'm looking at belongs in part to the health belief world, and it belongs in part to this motivation to change world. And then you ask yourself, what are the theories that are relevant to me in this space? And so the first theory that we cite is this theory of what's called the health belief model. And basically, this health belief model says, look, people will act in health promoting ways if they perceive that they're really a threat from what it is that they're trying to deal with. So if someone really thought that their alcohol misuse or their use of drugs was really a health threatening thing, that would be a good foundational point from which they begin to be motivated. But in terms of their perceived threat, there are certain things that influence the likelihood of someone taking that recommended health action. And according to the health belief model, those factors exist as 6 different spheres. And these are spheres of influence. They refer to them normally as health belief domains. So in this model, we are saying that that element of your interest that related to health beliefs actually is driven by these 6 potential things. That the first one is the perceived benefits the perceived threat of the disease. So if someone really thinks, hey, I'm heavily threatened by this, they are likely to act. Or the perceived severity of the disease. So someone will say, well, I'm at risk, but the thing I'm at risk of is such a small inconvenience that I don't stress myself. Or some will say the perception of susceptibility changes things. So you will know that there are some, if we talk about the issue of substance misuse, there are some people who will say, look, I come from a genetic line where we can drink and we never get drunk. So they don't perceive that they're susceptible to this condition. So clearly these factors that I have examples of factors, there's 6 of them, but I've just picked on 3. They are all guiding factors into how much someone's belief can affect the likelihood of them taking action. So if they believe they have low threat or high threat of the disease, they believe the disease is severe or not severe, and so forth. So those things play a part in their action. So that's the first theory that you would look at in relation to that question. Of course, I also said, look, so in actual fact, this slide here just helps to explain what I've already explained, and I won't focus on it. But if, yep, I think that's a repetition. I'll just jump that too. And this is also the conclusion of that consideration. The next thing that occurs when one considers the the domains or the theoretical spaces of interest. The next theoretical space of interest that we had was motivation. We said, okay, people can decide to engage in something because their belief tells them to, and their belief is driven by the perceived risk, the perceived susceptibility, the perceived seriousness of the condition they're dealing with, and so forth and so forth. The next thing that affects how they choose to relate with this priority is their overall motivation to act. Now, there's a person called Maslow who came up with a theory, and this is a very old theory. It's, I think, 1970 or 1957, actually, that he came up with this theory. And, 1970. Yeah, 1970. The theory basically makes this argument that when people are asked to focus on things, they prioritize, their motivation is prioritized, and is prioritized in a very specific way. They will deal with their physiological needs first. So if the thing you're asking them to do jeopardizes their access to food, water, warmth, or rest, then they will treat it seriously. If it's something that affects their safety needs, it's their security, but not their foods, they will treat it with a lesser need than if it affected things that had to do with survival. And as you go further and further up this pyramid, you get to the point where there are these self-fulfillment needs. Like people will say, look, I am doing or changing my behavior in relation to drinking for the good of the world because I want to be a nice person, or I want to reach my goal of being a person who is seen as a high standing member of society. That type of motivation exists, but it is not as compelling as someone who's motivated because drinking, they perceive that continuing to drink would jeopardize their safety, for example. So in essence, what this pyramid that you've got does is it shows you the categories of ways of things that are likely to motivate people to act. And the argument that Maslow had was that if stopping alcohol or engaging in a particular health behavior is perceived by that person as being important to address their self-actualization, they will only do something about it if their esteem needs, their belongingness and love needs, their safety needs, and their physiological needs have been met. So that's how the theory of motivation becomes relevant and important to this. So we've identified now that that topic that I gave you had two theoretical possibilities, hey? And those two theoretical possibilities to do with motivation, and one was to do with the other one was to do with people's beliefs. Some people may say, hey, hang on a minute. Apart from people wanting to stop drinking because of their health beliefs or their motivations, some might want to stop, but may be scared to seek help because of the stigma that comes with it. So then you think, here's a field of theories that I can relate to that will help me to understand this. Theories that are related to stigma and social prejudices. So here I identified two contributors. There are three of them, but they represent two theoretical perspectives. The first one is Goffman's stigma theory, and in it he says, look, there are three types of stigma. One associated with mental illness, stigma associated with physical deformation, and stigma attached to identification with a particular race ethnicity, religion, or ideology. So these types of stigma actually make certain behaviors less likely to receive support, less likely to be acknowledged. So someone might say, look, I'm a drinker, but me going to a class for people who drink actually is now confirming that I believe I have a mental illness, and I cannot do that because it affects my social acceptance possibilities. And so that's another type of theory. I've included a theory here by Lincoln Phelan, where they argue that actually stigma can occur when four interrelated components like a labeling process, stereotypes, this whole separation of us and them, the loss of status, and discrimination all converge. So if you think about someone who's identified as a drinker, yes, they'll get the label of being a drunkard. They'll get all the stereotypes that go with being a drunkard, that they're dishonest, they're this, they're that. They are then separated from the world by them being seen as them, and we consider ourselves to be us. They lose the social status they had because of the label that they've got. So in theory, you could argue that, hey, the role of stigma has a huge part to play, and the two theories that are useful are Goffman's stigma theory and the Lincoln Phelan interrelated components theory. So essentially, what we have now done is we have theoretically framed that question. We've framed it by referring to the health belief model. We've framed it by relating to the motivational theories. We framed it by looking at some social and stigma related theories. So now all those theories are what you now use as your range of theories to help understand the topic. Those things presented together represent a theoretical framework. And there are other theoretical frameworks that we can look at. This Taylor and Field social participation theory is also another theoretical framework that says, hey, some people, if they are negatively given a label that is negative, it will restrict their sense of wanting to be the full human that they deserve to be. They will lose social confidence and so forth and so forth. So this is another theory that's relevant. But how it is important that I thought I would include this is that when you are now putting together an emerging conceptual framework, you take all the theories that we spoke about. You take the health belief model and its 6 components, and they are not included here. You take the Taylor and Field social participation theory. You take Maslow's theory of motivation. You take the components of Goffman's stigma theory. Then you take the Lincoln Phelan components of stigma theory and you throw them all in a hat. Then you say, from these things, in Goffman's theory, I'm only interested in X. In the Taylor and Field social participation theory, I'm only interested in negative labeling. In the Maslow's theory of motivation, I'm only interested in self-actualization and so forth. Then you would come out and say, out of these 60, 70 concepts that were buried in my 4 theories, I am interested in, I want to develop an emerging framework that has 10 of those concepts only. That thing that emerges is then what we call a conceptual framework. So I think I've helped to clarify for you what theoretical frameworks are. I've helped to clarify what conceptual frameworks are, and I've taken you on a very quick test drive of how you move from research problem, from your research topic, from your aim, to a theoretical framing of your study, and from theoretical framing to conceptual framing. And essentially, once you understand that, then you now know that your conceptual framework becomes the basis of you having, it is the basis of you having things that you can refer to as your concepts of interest. And once you have those concepts of interest, then you have the rudimentary building blocks of a data collection instrument, because then it tells you that these are the 10 concepts you're interested in. So your data collection instrument should cover those 10 things. And that is essentially what the second section of today was focusing on. Now, I want to invite questions. So that we can look at some of the things that you are all interested in. But I think we have essentially covered what we need to cover, and I will come out of this and look at the questions that are being presented. Right, I'm just waiting for the questions to load up. They tend to have a slight delay. Right, I'm just waiting for the live Q&A to come up. Right, I'm not sure what has happened, but the live questions have not shown themselves up to me yet. So I know while I wait for the questions to come up, people would generally have questions about how all this material that we gave can be used in one go. The basic answer is it cannot be used in one go. You know that theory and the concepts related to theory can appear in 3 ways. And those 3 ways are as in theory, in terms of helping you to determine your paradigm and the choices you make there. It will also come up in theory as a lens. It will also come up in theory as new knowledge. So those are the opportunities. And then what I've done now is exposed you to one of the opportunities, but it is not explicitly limited to that. Right. I am going to very quickly try to get my camera back up. I'm going to try to very quickly get my camera back up so you can have a look at me when you're considering the questions that you have posed to me. There's a number of questions here, and all right, I have turned on my camera. I think it should come on, and then I shall go back to the questions. I am live. My face is live now. I am just waiting for the questions to reload. I think there was like 10 questions that had come up. Yes, yeah, so I shall. Okay, so there's a question asking interpretative phenomenology different. So interpretivism is the paradigm, is more paradigm. Okay? It's more of a paradigm, and interpretative phenomenology is actually a tradition, or for a better word, design within the paradigm. So interpretivism is the umbrella term that includes to qualitative things that involve interpret. Those things under the umbrella are interpretative phenomenology. So yes, they do differ, but they only differ in the mother of the other, and that mother has many other children. So that's the difference. There's a question that says, I'm doing a master's. Is it a requirement that theoretical framework should be part in my chapters as a section or a chapter on its own? I think I've mentioned and spoken to this question a number of times already. The first thing that you always do, and this is rule number one, is that I teach you what the standard, but you must department figure out what people are acting as the norm. I'll give an answer now, but you must go and qualify it by going to your department. And the answer is that a full master's, and when I say a full master's, I mean someone who has registered for a master's course where the only things expected from you is the completion of a dissertation. Then in that type of master's, you need to have a standalone theoretical framework, conceptual framework chapter. But if you're doing a master's that maybe has some coursework in it, to do is a mini, then you embed the issues of theoretical frameworks in other chapters. They don't stand alone. That is the basic rule. But you, as I say, you need to go and check whether that rule is being followed explicitly to the letter as I have described it. Okay. I think how here is the same. The question Gaugelo has presented around should I use phenomenology interchangeably with interpretative phenomenology? It is, I've already answered it. It's a little bit like saying someone lives in Gauteng and they also live in Johannesburg. Do you use Gauteng and Johannesburg interchangeably? And sometimes you may, but it is always better to be specific. So that's the response to that. And then of course, constructivism is the bigger building block to interpretivism, and I'll explain this. So the big umbrella is constructivism, which argues that the reality that we're in is constructed by the person. Interpretivism argues that the reality is constructed by the person's thinking, or the interpretations they read. And then social constructivism is that it is constructed by the social space that they're in. So interpretivism is sometimes spoken about as being a baby of constructivism, but another baby of constructivism is social constructivism. So you need to make sure you don't get those things mixed up. Is bracketing the same as disclosing one's biases in interpretative studies? It is the same, but it's more than just disclosing them. It's disclosing and acknowledging how they impact your lens. They impact the way that you see things. And you then saying these are the explicit actions that I will take to do something about this bias that I've identified in myself. Samuel asked, Prof, when it comes to conceptual framework, does it mean we only include concepts developed from conceptual frameworks? Can we also include independent and dependent variables to explain the conceptual framework? Now, look, the story is that conceptual frameworks are largely a combination of theoretical components from other theoretical frameworks, but sometimes somebody will have other theory that exists, which is not presented as an explicit theoretical framework, but it's an accepted truth in that space that they are studying. So they would introduce those variables, but they don't just pick them from their head. You include them by saying, I'm including them because there's other literature that's not in the form of theories that supports their inclusion. So you can include them, you just have to back them up as having come from some theoretical source. What determines that a theory is validated? A theory that has been tested, peer-reviewed, subjected to testing before, subjected to critique when it's being published, and that is validated. And that has been used, and other people have referred to it as being relatively reflective of the reality that it purports itself to be explaining. Is it possible to do spatial and multi-level analysis for PhD program? Right. You know, question to this session. So answering it involves diverting entirely from what we're talking about. The basic answer is, in any study, your job is the best way and quickest way to answer the question at hand. So the issue is, if spatial and multi-level analysis is the only methodology that you can get to answer the question at hand, and it is the most frugal, energy efficient option, then it is possible. But I find that most times it is not the most appropriate means. So in general, it is possible, but in reality, it's highly unlikely. Millicent has asked what the theories, how many theories are ideal for a PhD research. I thought, Millicent, if you refer back to my study, to my initial presentation, I spoke about the fact that the determination of your theories is dependent on the variables that appear or the concepts that appear in your study. So if your concept is interested in if your study is interested in 5 concepts, then one would think that you probably would have about 5 theories. Sometimes your study is interested in 2 concepts, but those 2 concepts all have 2 theories each that are relevant, so you end up with 4. But generally speaking, it's more than 3 at PhD level. It's not a rule, it's kind of what tends to happen. Hello is asking, I'm doing communication. Is it correct for me to frame theory first as my jobs, then communications, then the communication concepts that I lift from the communication theories? Hello, the question is a little bit too operational for me to answer. The bottom line is that you should know that the operation of theories is that you go from ontological position to epistemological position to methodology. No, from epistemology you go to paradigm. From paradigm you go to methodology. From methodology you go to methods. So the order in which you do things should be in that way. The more grand theoretical position you choose first. From your experience, which is more used by students, conceptual or theoretical frameworks? I think this question has missed my point entirely. Every study needs a theoretical framework, and every study needs a conceptual framework, because the theoretical framework is what helps you to give the boundaries of what you're interested in, and then the conceptual framework gives you the specific concepts that you are interested within that boundary. So it's not one or the other, they exist dually. But I think you need to have really listened closely to my presentation to be able to see that that question is answered a number of times throughout the presentations. What is the relationship between conceptual and theoretical frameworks and the literature review? Well, actually, remember, literature reviews happen in chapter 2. So when you're reviewing the literature, you are identifying the arguments that have existed, the definition, the areas you're looking at. So literature reviews come before conceptual and theoretical frameworks because they identify the bigger theoretical space in which your study is located, but your theoretical frameworks then come closer and closer. Some, of course, those people who have studied options that mean that they must combine things, they would find that the literature review and conceptual framework are spoken about closely to each other, especially in mini dissertations where they are sometimes within the same chapter. Can you put the conceptual framework in your literature chapter? This question I think I've answered by explaining that there are different levels of study that have different decisions around where conceptual frameworks lie, but in the gold standard, the conceptual framework must, and the theoretical framework are standalone issues, but in summarized versions of dissertations, they do throw them into the literature chapter in some way. The issue with literature chapter is you need to explain exactly what you intend to do to the reader, so that even if you decide to include a conceptual framework in it, you explain it, you clarify it to the reader so that they are able to understand your basic reasoning. What is the difference between a conceptual framework and a model? I think I've spoken about that already. Yes, folks, some of these questions that are being asked are really things that require people to go back to the session, because if you have missed those things, then in all likelihood you have probably missed a fair amount of the session. I have said that theoretical frameworks are theories, models, and other things that have been put together. Conceptual framework is an untested joining up of concepts that help to frame things, and you do so with an explicit disclaimer that, look, these are just a framing of these things. A model is a much more substantive thing that people do at the end of a data collection process, where they say, look, I've got my conceptual framework, I've got literature from the ground, I've got all sorts of things, I've joined them up, and I am now happy to give my summative opinion about what I think this thing that I'm looking at can be theoretically represented. And that's when you throw the model in. Megan has thanked me for explanations of theoretical frameworks. Folks, this I will tell you, and I say this not to make myself appear any different from many other researchers, but I've attended many sessions where I listen to explanations of theoretical frameworks, conceptual frameworks, and I've left the sessions that were more confused at the end than they should have been, because the clarity in the presenter is not there. So, but progressively people have kind of become much more clear about this. So this clarity that around any of your peers, and sometimes even more advanced researchers to you, have this clarity presented to them in this very clear way. Is it possible to add more conceptual frameworks in addition to the one you have after in discussion? Look, yes, remember now, I think people need to think about how I said theory appears. Theory appears in 3 places. So if you are deciding that you want to have a conceptual framework in the new knowledge section, you can do so, but it has to now have a purpose. So that conceptual framework is different from the conceptual framework that you would have done when you were joining up theories. This conceptual framework you're talking about is actually much more a framework, not a conceptual framework. It is a framework. And a conceptual framework is about concepts, but a framework or a model or whatever it is you develop is more to do with the framing of both concepts and findings and so forth. So we need to just be explicit about that. Thank you for a wonderful session. This is Ernest. My question is what is the more appropriate method of presenting a theoretical framework? Some say follow the following order. Who did it, when? What are the arguments that later you explain? Some say an integrated approach. No, okay, look, Ernest, I have to declare I have supervised and graduated probably 35 doctorates, probably 70, 80 masters students, and then I've had a company that did this with thousands and thousands of masters and doctoral students. And so one thing I do know is that the answers you get from people will differ, but you have to make a choice about which one is more reliable by virtue of how many times that individual has seen the journey. So I always lean on the fact that this PhD journey, I've seen it in all sorts of, I mean, I've supervised, actually I'm supervising someone in environmental sciences now, and they are studying something to do with the erosion of they're actually looking at workplace accidents and all sorts of things within people working in parks and whatever else. So I have seen this world, and basically the best way to present a theoretical framework is to just, in that chapter, is to begin by giving an overview of chapter is, with all chapters, you give a roadmap, then explain to the reader what your intended roadmap for the chapter will be. And one of the roadmaps that works is that you say, look, you are looking at your studies focusing on these things, and these things belong to these discipline areas, and these discipline areas are founded on these specific theories. Then you explain each theory on its own, what the theory is about, what it adds to your understanding of the phenomena you're interested in, what components of that theory look exclusively relevant to you. And you do that with theory 1, you do that with theory 2, theory 3. Then when you've got those theories, you say, right, now these theories all had 3 or 4 concepts I was interested in. These are the 3 or 4 concepts. You talk about them, and then you say these 3 or 4 concepts can be conceptualized as being related to each other in this way. And I present that with the diagram below, which is then your conceptual framework. Then you speak about that conceptual framework and how it's a useful way of seeing your topic, and how then you relate it to the potential of it being a source of data for you to develop your data collection instrument and so forth. So that is how I would go about it. But you know, you should have a look at work from your field and see how that sits. Is it compulsory for one to utilize both the theoretical and conceptual framework? The issue is not about utilizing them. They are actually necessary bits. You cannot study fields without knowing what theories help you to understand that field, those fields. So the theoretical bits come in, and then if you have studied 2 or 3 concepts and you join them up in a way that they've not been joined up before, by definition, the theories that you find will not be perfect fits. So you have to take elements of them and forget other elements. And these elements you take, you create a conceptual framework with. So you cannot actually really have conceptual framework, a theoretical framework without a conceptual framework. If you have a theoretical framework that is a perfect fit to your study, then you are almost essentially studying something that has already been studied, and it raises then questions about why it is that you're studying something where there's already an existing perfectly fitting theory. So these things are all connected. Please provide clarity on how the conceptual framework guides the questionnaire in interview questions. I think I've explained this already. I urge you to go back to the session. The concepts that are in a study are literally the things of interest that you are going to pursue. So if one of your concepts is, say your conceptual framework concept is stigma that you're interested in, then you need to ask questions in your study about stigma. So that's how it's guided. If one of your concepts is about someone's perception that they're susceptible, then you ask questions about susceptibility. So that's how it's guided. Or someone would say, if it's about susceptibility, read up what the components of susceptibility are. Then you name those 5 or 10 things and you articulate them as specific items on your data collection instrument. Good evening, Prof. Does a theory such as government used well inclusive as my topic is about learners' impairment? Looks so it's impossible to answer that question without knowing what the issue about learners' impairment you are looking at. If you're looking at learners' impairment as being a source of discrimination, then yeah. But if learners in a different way, then possible it is not. Is it necessary to include a theory in a research proposal? The basic answer is yes. There is no way that you can make a decision about paradigms without having decided what theoretical positions assist you. But you know, the extent to which you do this, I suggest you go back to other proposals in your field and you look at those. Is critical theory a standalone paradigm or a subset of constructivist? Look, folks, theories, there's only positivist theories, interpretivist, subjectivism, all these other things that have got theory appended to them are not grand theories in that way. They are baby theories. So critical theory, depending on the context in which you meet it, it is really literally a design, or some would even argue a methodology. So it is not a paradigm in the truest sense of how you define a paradigm. It is a way of approaching a data collection engagement. So it is at the same level as phenomenology and other things that are babies of the bigger things. Right, folks, in front of me, and there's something that's asked for a difference between conceptual and theoretical frameworks. I think this was Anonymous 720, you're a good facilitator, but theoretical frameworks are just complicated. Yeah, thank you for saying I'm a good facilitator. I wish you didn't still believe theoretical frameworks are complicated, because they aren't. They really are not. But I think the other thing people make the mistake of doing is the research is a complex thing. So the idea that you could know something with the fluency in which I was from listening to me for an hour and a half is just impossible. I had to do 10 years, 12 years of figuring this out. So what I want to do is that the have when you hear something doesn't always deliver it. You now have access to the video, so you can continue with the video and read up again. You can read up again from the listen to the video, read up again. There are other presenters online that try to differentiate these things. There is also the written presentations that are provided for you. And I think that after you've had 3 or 4 variations of these things, you will definitely get this. I hope that this makes sense to you. I want to wish everyone a great evening, and we will see each other in 2 weeks time. So as you, I think I might ask that one of our of my team just make an announcement about session will be, but in the absence of that, you know that we send out these things. I wish you the very best. The next sessions, I'm revising them slightly, so I walk people through their proposals. I walk this looks like. Hopefully that will help to bring things together for you. With that, I want to wish you all a good night, and I hope that tonight has been as helpful as I am hoping it is, and I thank you very much. Yes, and by the way, you will know that we have additional opportunities for those who want to ask questions. We do have email-based options for you to pursue, and I think we will go with those. Thank you very much. I wish you all a good night. Take care. Thank you. Oh, and the person who was asking that was Daphne, it seems. Yes, thank you. Have a great evening, everyone, and good night.